Claire had always loved the house. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a modest two-story cottage on the edge of town, tucked away among overgrown trees, and a sprawling garden that had long since lost its charm. But to Claire, it was perfect. She had spent years saving every penny, working late nights and long weekends, just to buy a space she could finally call her own. It wasn't much, but it was hers. When she moved in, the air was filled with the scent of freshly painted walls and the distant echo of her footsteps, the sound of her presence. It was quiet, peaceful, perfectly still. It was everything Claire had dreamed of. There were no roommates, no noisy neighbors, just the solitude she had craved for so long. The first night was uneventful. Claire unpacked a few boxes, arranged her things the way she liked, and prepared herself for the long journey of settling in. She turned in early, eager to start the next chapter of her life. The house creaked and groaned as old houses do, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was the second night when the noises started. At first, Claire thought it was just the house settling. Old houses make strange sounds, settling floorboards, pipes expanding and contracting, a distant wind rattling the windows. But the noises didn't stop after a few minutes. They continued, stretching into the night, scratching, faint taps, a soft rustling as if something or someone was moving in the walls. Claire sat up in bed, straining to listen, the dark shadows of her bedroom suddenly feeling a little less inviting. But as she lay there, she couldn't make sense of it. The noises didn't seem to come from the usual places. They weren't just the creaks of the old wooden floors, or the whistling of the wind under the doorframe. These were deliberate sounds, slow, rhythmic, like something or someone was waiting, listening, just as she was. The next morning, she convinced herself it was nothing. Perhaps some wildlife had gotten into the attic, or a rat had made its way into the walls. It was an old house, after all, nothing to be alarmed about. But then the noises became more distinct. It wasn't long before Claire started noticing little things out of place. At first it was small, a cup in the kitchen that wasn't there the night before, a picture frame slightly askew on the mantelpiece. Little things, easily dismissed. But then it escalated. She would walk into a room and find things moved around, furniture shifted just an inch or two. The bed wasn't made the way she had left it. A towel that she had hung up was crumpled on the floor. The worst part? She was absolutely certain she hadn't done it. At first, she chalked it up to forgetfulness. Maybe she'd moved the cup herself and forgotten. Maybe the picture frame had fallen and she hadn't noticed. But deep down, Claire felt the creeping unease. It was as if something was in the house with her. By the end of the second week, the atmosphere had shifted. The house no longer felt like hers. It felt as if it was shared with something else, something unseen. The shadows in the corners of her rooms grew longer, darker, almost as if they were reaching for her. The temperature would drop suddenly without explanation, and the air felt thick, pressing against her lungs. It was as though the house itself was watching her, waiting. One night, she decided to investigate. Armed with nothing more than a flashlight, Claire began to search the house. She checked the attic, the basement, every room. She even climbed up to the roof to check the gutters, thinking that maybe a loose tile was making strange sounds when the wind blew. But there was nothing, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. Yet the feeling persisted. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, her heart quickened. Something was wrong. But what? The next few days passed in a blur, the noises continuing, each night more intense than the last. Claire began to lose sleep. She found herself waking in the middle of the night, eyes wide open, listening intently to the eerie sounds echoing through the house. Sometimes she would hear what sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, just outside her bedroom door. But when she would open the door, there would be nothing but silence, and the faintest whisper, as if someone was breathing just beyond the threshold. It wasn't until one evening when Claire was sitting in the living room, reading a book by the dim light of the lamp, that she saw something that stopped her cold. In the reflection of the window, she could see the outline of a figure, faint, almost translucent, standing just behind her in the room. It was only a moment, but it was enough. Her heart stopped, her body froze. She spun around, but the room was empty. Her pulse thudded in her ears as she turned back to the window. The figure was gone, but the feeling of being watched lingered. That night, Claire locked every door and window. She placed a chair beneath the doorknob, a makeshift barrier. Her mind raced with possibilities, burglars, intruders, perhaps a figment of her imagination. She tried to sleep, but the silence was deafening. Then a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She grabbed the flashlight and rushed downstairs. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she reached the kitchen. The room was dark, save for the faint light of the moon shining through the window. The dishes were scattered across the floor, a glass shattered into 1,000 pieces. But what terrified her the most was the coldness. The air in the kitchen felt different, heavier, almost suffocating. Her flashlight swept over the room, and that's when she saw it. On the far wall, a small crack had appeared in the plaster. It was just wide enough for something to slip through, a sliver of darkness that shouldn't have been there. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the crack hadn't been there earlier. And then the whispers began. Low, almost inaudible at first, but growing louder, like a crowd gathering just beyond her reach. She could barely make out the words. Some of them sounded like her name. Others were unintelligible. She stepped closer to the crack, the light of the flashlight trembling in her hands. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, and then she saw it. A shape, shifting just beyond the crack, moving, like something was slithering between the walls. A sudden gust of cold air swept past her, and she spun around. The kitchen door slammed shut behind her. Her mind raced. She had to leave, she had to get out. But as her fingers grasped the door handle, she realized something horrifying. The door wouldn't open. The walls felt alive now, shifting, groaning, almost as if they were closing in on her. The whispers were now accompanied by faint, scratching noises, as though something, or someone, was trapped inside the walls, desperate to get out. Claire backed away slowly, her chest tightening with fear. She had to escape. She had to get out of the house. She was about to run to the front door when she saw the reflection in the window again. This time, there was no doubt. It was standing right behind her. Claire froze, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The reflection in the window wasn't just a shadow or an illusion. It was a figure, a dark silhouette standing just behind her, barely visible in the dim light, but unmistakable in its presence. Her mind screamed at her to turn around, to face whatever was there, but her body refused to obey. She was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The whispers grew louder.
Claire.
The voice was low, guttural, almost a rasp, like it had been waiting for her to hear it for a long time. But the voice didn't sound like it was coming from outside the window. No. The voice was coming from within the house, from somewhere just beyond her reach. The figure in the window didn't move, but she could feel it. She could feel its eyes on her, a presence that seemed to press in from all sides. Suddenly the sound of a scraping noise broke through the silence, harsh and unnerving, coming from behind the walls, just beneath the surface, like claws on wood. Scratching, scratching, scratching. The air felt wrong, thick, heavy, and impossibly cold, as if the temperature had dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Her breath turned to mist as she exhaled, the weight of the atmosphere suffocating her. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, to leave the house, to escape whatever was in here with her. But her legs felt as if they had turned to stone, her feet glued to the floor. The reflection in the window moved. She didn't want to look, but something compelled her. With great effort, she turned her head slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of it in the corner of her vision. The figure wasn't just standing there anymore. It was slowly advancing toward her, its form contorting, shifting unnaturally, the edges of its body stretching and warping like smoke in the air. Claire's heart hammered in her chest. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Her mind kept telling her that, but every new detail she saw only made the situation more impossible to deny. The figure in the reflection was no longer a simple shadow. It was a being, a creature of darkness, its features hidden beneath layers of shifting blackness, but she could still see the outline of its face, thin, elongated, with hollow eyes that seemed to absorb the light around them.
"No."
She whispered, barely able to form the word.
"No, no, no, no!"
She took a hesitant step back, then another, as if she could distance herself from the reflection in the window, but it followed her. The figure's head turned slowly to follow her every movement, its hollow eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach drop. In that moment, she realized something that made her blood run cold. The figure in the window wasn't a reflection. It was something else. It was behind her, standing in the living room, inches from her back.
Claire.
The voice rasped again, this time unmistakably coming from inside the room, from the space just behind her.
Claire.
She couldn't hold it in anymore. Her feet suddenly found the strength to move, and with a terrified scream, she turned toward the doorway. But as her hand grasped the doorknob, a cold, invisible force gripped her wrist, yanking her back with a speed that nearly knocked her off her feet. Her flashlight fell from her hand, rolling across the floor, casting wild beams of light on the walls. She staggered, trying to wrench free, but the invisible grip tightened, pulling her further into the room. She tried to scream, but the air seemed to smother her, her lungs unable to draw in enough breath. She stumbled, spinning around to face her tormentor, her eyes desperately scanning the dim room. Then the scratching noise resumed, but this time it was no longer just in the walls. The sound was coming from beneath her feet. Claire's gaze snapped to the floor, where the hardwood had begun to buckle. A crack appeared at the edge of the floorboards, wide enough for her to see the black void beneath the house. A cold, seeping chill rose from the crack, filling the room with an unnatural stillness. She stepped back, but before she could react, the crack widened, an impossibly large mouth, gaping, emerging from the floor, the darkness swallowing everything in its path. Something moved within, something alive, and as Claire stared in horror, she realized the terrifying truth. The house itself was alive, and it was hungry.
Run, Claire.
Claire.
Run, Claire.
The voice came again, low and insistent, echoing through the room. It was not one voice, but many, thousands of whispers, each one distinct, layered over one another, all calling her name. But she didn't move. She couldn't. Her legs wouldn't obey. She had nowhere to go. Suddenly the room grew darker. The shadows themselves seemed to shift, expanding, filling every corner, reaching out toward her. The temperature dropped again, her breath misting before her as the shadows in the corners of the room began to morph, shifting into vaguely humanoid shapes, stretching out from the walls.
You're not
You're not
Claire.
alone, Claire.
It wasn't just a voice anymore. The words were spoken by a thing, a being in the room with her, something that had been there all along, hiding in the corners, moving with the shadows, a creature she couldn't see but could feel, a presence that watched her, studied her, waiting for her to realize that she had never truly been alone in this house. A flicker of movement caught her eye. She turned to look at it, but before she could focus, the world around her seemed to collapse. The shadows lunged forward, wrapping around her, pulling her into the very walls of the house. She screamed, but her voice was swallowed, absorbed into the dark air. For a moment, there was nothing. No light, no sound, just an oppressive, choking stillness. Then a door opened in front of her. It was like the door to another world, a room that she had never seen before. The air inside was thick, like smoke, and the walls pulsated with an eerie, unnatural rhythm. But there was something worse, something far worse, about the room beyond that door. It was alive in a way the rest of the house had never been. The floor beneath Claire's feet gave way, and she was pulled through the open door. As the darkness closed in, the shadows around her shifted once more, their forms materializing into beings, dark, tall, thin shapes, their eyes glowing red, watching her with silent hunger. In that moment, Claire knew there was no escaping this house. The creatures had been here long before she moved in, watching from the walls, waiting for the perfect time. And now that she had seen them, now that she had realized their presence, she would become part of their world, a silent tenant in a house that had been living long before she ever stepped foot inside. As she fell into the darkness, the last thing she heard was a chorus of whispers, each one more menacing than the last.
Welcome
home,
Claire.
Claire.
Claire's body felt weightless, as if she were floating, but there was no sensation of air, no sense of movement. Her lungs burned with the desperate need to breathe, but every breath she took was thick and stifled, saturated with the oppressive cold that surrounded her. The shadows seemed to press in from every direction, their forms shifting, growing more solid with each passing second. The room she was now in felt like something otherworldly, alien, and yet all too familiar. It was a place that had never existed in her house, a dark, pulsating cavity beneath the floorboards, stretching out into infinity. The walls bent and warped, as if they were made of rubber, responding to the pressure of something unseen pushing against them. It was as though the entire space was alive, breathing, flexing around her. The creatures surrounding her were no longer just shadows. They had taken form now, tall, grotesque figures with elongated limbs and twisted skeletal faces that seemed to be carved from the darkness itself. Their eyes were empty voids, black and endless, but they glowed faintly, like stars lost in the abyss. As they moved, the air grew thicker, heavier, almost suffocating, and Claire felt as though she were drowning in it. She tried to scream, but the words stuck in her throat, caught by an invisible force that seemed to silence her. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she stumbled backward, her feet unable to find solid ground, slipping against the slick, shifting surface beneath her. The creatures began to move closer, their long, bony hands outstretched, their fingers twitching with an unsettling urgency. They spoke in a language that was both ancient and foreign, their voices a low hum, vibrating the very air around her. And then one of them stepped forward, its form larger than the others, its shape more defined, as though it were the leader, the one who controlled them. It reached out, its skeletal hand hovering inches from her face, its black eyes boring into hers, and Claire felt a sudden, jarring pull in her chest, as if something deep inside her was being yanked toward it.
"You shouldn't have come here,"
the creature whispered, its voice soft but terrifying, like the wind scraping across a tombstone.
"This house is ours. You're never meant to leave."
A cold shiver ran down Claire's spine. Her legs felt weak, and she dropped to her knees, unable to stand against the heavy pressure that was building in the room. Her vision began to blur, her mind clouding with dizziness. But one thing remained clear. These beings, these creatures, they were not just inhabiting the house. They were part of it. They were the house itself.
You were never meant to know.
The creature continued, its face twisting with something like sorrow, or perhaps hunger.
We've waited so long. You came to us. You opened the door, Claire.
Claire's breath hitched in her throat, panic surging within her.
No.
She whispered, her voice barely audible.
This isn't real. None of this is.
The creature tilted its head, an unnatural motion that made Claire's stomach churn.
It's real, Claire.
It murmured, its fingers brushing the air near her face.
And now that you've seen us, now that you've discovered us, there's no going back.
It leaned closer, and Claire could feel the cold emanating from its body like a suffocating fog.
We've always been here, waiting.
With a sickening, wet sound, the floor beneath Claire's feet trembled, and the walls began to ripple as though they were alive. The scratching sound from earlier, the one that had been so subtle, so quiet, grew louder, more intense. It wasn't just coming from the walls anymore. It was coming from everywhere. From the floor, from the ceiling, from deep beneath the house. It was the sound of something ancient, something hungry, moving beneath her skin, crawling within the very foundation of the building. She felt the house shift, its walls folding in on themselves like the ribs of a monstrous beast. The house was tightening its grip on her, consuming her with each breath she took. The creatures weren't just watching her anymore. They were feeding off her fear, feeding off her recognition of them. Claire's body spasmed with the need to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The door she had seen earlier, the one she thought had led to freedom, was now sealed, its edges bleeding shadows that stretched like tendrils.
You can't run from us.
The creature whispered again, this time louder, its voice reverberating through her bones.
We are the house, and the house never forgets.
The pressure around Claire intensified, as though the very walls were pressing in on her chest, squeezing the breath from her lungs. Her vision blurred again, her body trembling from the overwhelming force of the room around her. She tried to move, to push herself to her feet, but her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed to the floor, gasping for air.
It's okay, Claire. You'll be one of us now.
The creature said softly, its skeletal face looming above hers.
One of the silent tenants who live within these walls. Forever.
And in that moment, Claire understood. The house wasn't just a place where these creatures existed. It was their home. They had always been there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the next person to make the mistake of stepping inside. And now she was no different than them, trapped, part of something dark, something ancient. Her body began to numb, her mind growing sluggish as the world around her seemed to blur into a black, suffocating haze. She felt herself being pulled downward, deeper into the very foundation of the house, as though the house itself were swallowing her whole. And just before everything went black, just as she felt herself slipping into the dark abyss of the house's endless grip, she heard one final whisper.
Welcome home, Claire.